Go ahead and get recording. I'll do a quick introduction just to make sure for the last 30 seconds or so. My name is Danielle Painter. I am part of the digital government team, more specifically the Drupal side of the house. We usually call ourselves agency platform. Sorry, I had a pop up on my screen. I was trying to read it. What we usually do is we help build this websites that you guys are using from our services. I try to help fix what gets broken, and at the same time, I probably break stuff by mistake. And I always enjoy when we break stuff. So if you don't have a site or you need just to be able to see what we're kind of going through a little bit closer, that just a little bit bigger in the screen instead of the PowerPoint presentation, you can use the training site, and the username and password is on the screen, but as well it's pinned in the messages in the chat, and that's the little chat bubble on the bottom right hand side of your screen for this meeting group. For today, we're kind of going to go over briefly a little bit what a content editor is. We have done digital dashes in the last couple of months. Some of you may have joined that recently to see what that was about for the initiative of writing with accessibility in mind. We also have some trainings that we've done in the last couple of months that we did record regarding a little bit more in depth about content types and layout builder. So I won't really touch into those today. I'll just briefly mention them, but you're able to go back into our YouTube or our agency platform site, and you can pull up those as well in case you need to cross-reference those at any time. So we will go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and introduce a bit about what a content editor is in case you're new to the role or you need a refresher. I know in the past year when I get tickets and I talk with some of you, a lot of you kind of get thrown into this role and you don't really know where to go. You don't really know what to do. And there's a whole lot of things that get thrown into your plate. And I just wanted to help make a little bit of clarity about the role of a content editor in the state. Your job as a content editor goes way beyond just making sure stuff is up to date. It is important to make sure stuff is up to date, but you're trying to inform the general public that there's services that we provide as government employees, and you're helping to cross that bridge for them to find those services and how to do those services or where to go for those services. It's a little bit different. So I came from an EDU background, and our priority is to get as many people as we can to our school, right? For you guys, it's more, people don't know where to go. They just moved into the state. They just built a business. They need some help adopting. You're giving them those resources to help get the services to them and for them to be able to do what they need to do promptly. You are also, in some agencies, all the agencies, obviously, because of the archiving and some of the policies in check, you are also giving transparency to what your agency does in the state. For our roles that we have with the agency platform sites, if you're an admin or a power user, you might see, content editor and content user that you can assign people, or content editor, content creator. Content editor lets them have more of a bigger reign of editing, adding, managing, those kind of things. The content creator is a little bit more stricter, and it's just letting them do even more basics of what content editors would do. So if you had like an intern or a student posting up content and you don't want them to touch everything else that you have access to, that's the type of role that you would give them. when we write, and for state employees, as we write for the general public, we have to keep some things in mind. We want to write for clarity, accuracy, and we do want to try to engage them. There was one digital dash that we've had recently where it talked about the type of communication to make it very simple, how to write in that communication. I believe we have that also in our YouTube channel too, if you wanted to view that. You know, with any style guides or standards in mind when we write, so the voice, who you're writing to. We have, obviously, tourism had given us the whole new branding initiative that we've had this year. That is part of it. Your agency may have a specific voice or way of putting pieces together that is relative to what services you give. And you have to keep a little bit of that in mind when you write. So obviously you're not going to write as if you're in fifth grade or to a fifth grader. You're writing to a different audience entirely. We need to consider accessible content. So in the case of images, for example, you're giving alternative ways of them to digest that information. You're giving alternative text to that image so screen readers are able to read it. I know there was a couple years way back when everybody was on the hype for, the infographics where you throw everything into an image and make people digest the content that way. If that's the only thing you have on a particular page and nothing else to it, it actually reduces the accessibility to that content that you're trying to provide. We also are writing in the sense of improving SEO results. And when you write for accessibility, you're also writing with SEO in mind as well. They kind of go hand in hand. You are considering the time and making sure your information is up to date. If you're working for office of the government, or the governor's office, you might have something that you need to prepare for a Friday release, but not necessarily publish it, but you need to make sure it's prepared on time. And you may have something that needs to be regularly updated. For instance, how can my 16-year-old, drive if you're part of transportation? It's critical to just kind of keep up to date, not let any information that you share publicly kind of go out of date for that reason. And also to mention that your audience is going to be generally broader than what you would get in a private sector. Your audience for a Department of Transportation might be a little bit different than the audience of administration. Or maybe even, I think it's DES that has the children's adoption site, Maria? I don't remember which agency has that one, but they have a very specific site that's for children adoptions. And, obviously that audience will be different than what ASET may give. But we should also keep in mind that users will get more frustrated that they can't find what they're looking for in a very short amount of time. If you guys are familiar with calling help desk for anything, whether it's your ISP or you're trying to get help with a travel arrangement of some form, you probably have gotten frustrated at one point or another because they're going through all the basics, and you might be 3 steps ahead than where they're at. We're kind of in that same boat as content editors. You're that first line, so they will get frustrated if you have a lot of stuff on your page. They will get frustrated if it takes them 30 clicks to get what they need to go. It'll also frustrate them if they're reading an entire novel on a web page. There has been studies in the recent past, where the amount of white space and the amount of width that you might have for your text and how much you put in a paragraph actually affects how people skim your sites and read your site. And that's been an interesting one as well. The goal as a content editor for here, you want to reduce that repetition, reduce anything really wordy. You want to keep it very, very simple. If you have a navigation that goes 4 or 5 sub-menus deep, you might want to look at reconsidering how you can change that content around so you're maybe only doing one sub-menu under your navigation at best. Trying to overly use carousels, adding 10 pictures might be a little bit too much. Maybe 1 or 2 is just a little bit better. There are cases where people usually just mostly read the first image, maybe the second. I think the drop off of the clicking rate actually drops off pretty big between the first and the second slide. You don't want to use idioms, so top of the block, those type of things. You don't really want to use them, and you don't want just a couple lines of content. So you don't want a page where all it is one sentence and then you have 6 subpages thereafter that you're trying to get people to go to. If the pages are short, it would be really ideal to try to write and bring that all together into one single page. Less pages tends to be a little bit easier to work with too when it comes to trying to keep all that stuff updated. It's like writing for a slide deck if you guys are familiar with making presentations. Or if you remember trying to do it in high school, your teachers are telling you, keep it short, keep it simple, do little bullet points, those kind of things. That's what we're working with. Our users need text that is brief and to the point. We want to keep it as well organized as much as possible. And what that ends up helping is it helps people with reading or memory and attention deficits, or maybe they have other cognitive conditions, and even for those that are speaking English as a second language. And just as a reminder, because we are government, our goal is to get our information out there to everybody, anybody that lives in the state, anybody that wants to visit the state. They're trying to come to us to get an answer, to fill out a form. They want to know when the due date is for their taxes, those kind of things. Because of that, our pool is generally bigger, and we are going to get the people who are colorblind. We are going to get the people who do use screen readers. We're going to get the people who are maybe only have a phone for their internet connection. They may not have a computer, not necessarily, or they might be in, an area where their bandwidth is insane and they can't, everything's like slow dial-up still. We also want to make sure that where they're located, they get to know the information that they need to get. We also have the DOJ requirement for all government websites in 2026 to comply to accessibility standards. And that includes the development, it includes the design, and it's going to even include the writing. So it's very, very crucial that we do a good job in how we give information to the public. So very quickly, we'll kind of go over the basics of what a content editor is going to touch. And then after this, I'll kind of shift the points over to give more of a live demo and guidance of what you're going to end up going into, and we'll just kind of play around a bit. Now, as a content editor, you're going to have a menu. You'll be able to see an admin menu on the left-hand side. It's the little white strip. If you're not familiar with it, we used to use the top black bar, but in Drupal 9, we went to a different theme, so now it's on the left-hand side. The second icon is a little page, and it gives you a central area, a little hub that you can access. And what this will give you is kind of the overall view of what pages you have, what media you have loaded up in your site. You might have additional things. You might have feeds. You might have workflow moderation. Some websites have that additionally. It's not every site. It's just some of the bigger ones. They like to have a little more little more control into the workflow to make sure the content that they provide is accurate. And for the other comment that I did have in this slide where I said comments aren't enabled in our platform, you will see it. You don't have to worry about it. By default, it's turned off. There is very, very, very rare occurrences where that would actually be enabled for our agency platform sites. I think at best I've seen it when people have used the sites as more of an intranet than an internal thing, than an external site that's public facing. When you go to the central hub, you'll get a little bit of more detail than what you're going to get to the standard page if you were just to visit the page. You'll get to know what type of content that is. You'll have different content types. Some of it might be sharing what your leadership is, or if it's a web form or if it's just a basic page. The main point of that is just content types give you certain fields that you can always routinely use and expect. And that's why we put them in different content types. You'll be able to tell if the page is published or unpublished. Unpublished means that anybody who is not an authenticated user with the permission checked will not see the page. You can see the page, but your visitors will not. So it's good. That one's good for drafting or the need to take down a page temporarily as you're trying to determine what may need to be done with the page. You can see who originally made the page. You can also see when it was last updated. By default, that filter actually organizes based off of that last updated. So the more recent one will be up at the top. You also have a section for files and media. We are working on our team to try to improve this a little bit. And as we improve from 9 to 10, this will also be improved a little bit too. Both files and media will allow you guys to see what images, what documents, any form of media that's been uploaded, and just in one little admin menu. So you can go to them, you can edit, you can see where they might be located or how many times at least it's been used. So you can tell if you have an image that isn't being used at all that you've uploaded, you could remove it, right? There are cases where, depending on the content editor, some are a little bit more tech savvy than others. A lot of people will like to just directly link to the file. They'll grab the link itself once it's been uploaded instead of going through the media input. And that can kind of construe the numbers a little bit. So just to be aware. Media also behaves very similarly, but it gives you a little more granular control about replacing your images, the cropping, and other little details like that. When you make your pages, you're going to often see fields. Your most common one is going to be a title, and the WYSIWYG editor for usually the body is what we describe it. Depending on your site, if you have a little bit more built into it, you might have other content types with different names, but also using the same editor. We can also get this from using Layout Builder. We have a few components that allows you to use the same editor as well, and we'll be kind of going over this editor in a little bit too. At the bottom of it, you'll often see something called text format. What this is if you swap it, if you do change it, it gives you a little bit more buttons that you can use. We always start with the basic HTML because, more often than not, all you need to do is do a bold or an italic. You may just need to add a link or a bullet list. There's usually not a whole lot more that most agencies need. But there are, if you change it to, I think, full HTML, you get a much more bigger gambit of what options you can pick in the editor. So I will go ahead and I will switch screens. These are some of the topics that we are going to go over a bit, more of kind of a candid discussion. You guys are welcome to interrupt, ask questions. It might take me a second to kind of digest the question, but I will answer them. We'll go over kind of briefly where to add the content, how to edit it, adding the media. We'll go over the editor, touch layout builder just a little bit, and we'll also discuss kind of the don't do's. I call it don't hack it because we do get people who want to add quite a bit to their pages, and the editors are the way they tend to do it. And I will discuss a bit about why it's not ideal to do that. So give me a minute and I will swap it over. So you guys are also welcome to use your website or our training site as well on your end if you need to see the screens a little bit better and follow along. As a content editor, like I mentioned, we have an admin panel specifically for content. It's the second item down. If you click the icon or you click overview, it gets you to the same page of where you'd like to go. To add content, you'll also be able to use it from that same menu. So you'll get the add content button instead, or the drop down menu instead. And then there's also an add content button when you go to the main hub. You will be given a list of content that you have access to as the role. Typically, as a content editor, you have access to most of these. Depending on how your site gets used, you may not even touch some of them. I know there's smaller agencies that will never touch alert and only ever use basic page. There might be bigger agencies where they have a whole new content type that's for something else. There's some for meetings if that's been set up for you, as well as in events. Most often, you're probably just going to use a basic page unless a different one is defined part of your agency. You're able to give your title, so that's going to be what shows up at the top of the tab as well as the top of the page. And then you're able to give the body of the text that you want. You'll have options on the right-hand side that lets you kind of set up revisions. So if you were to change something later and you need a reason to why, or to tell somebody else why, if you have multiple people that are editing the same page, you can do that there. You can set up the menu, meta tags, which we'll go over at the next meeting in a couple of weeks. We'll go into meta tags a little bit more in detail. There is XML sitemap, but you don't really have to worry about that. Just let that all be. If you need to change the address for the page when you make it, you can change it under URL alias. Authoring information can also be changed. So if you're writing on behalf of someone else, and let's say your templating actually shows who it's been written by, you could change it there. If you need to delay the post, the author it on, I believe, also works. You can change that. The promotion options, you can just ignore those. We don't use any of these features. They're kind of the Drupal core. And when you're able to, oh, I forgot to tell you, there is a publish page, a little toggle at the very top that you can unpublish. So if you unpublish it and you hit save, it comes up as a page, but it isn't visible to an individual. It's visible to you, but not to your reader. Some sites, it looks like we don't actually do it, but there's some projects I have worked on where they actually change the background, so it's a little easier to tell when it's published and you're visiting. But in this case, we have not. And for Mel, I'll mention that in a little bit. once we get to the actual do's and don'ts. We'll talk about that a little bit more because that's definitely a topic I'd like to mention. For each page that you also make, you get a few tabs up at the top when you go to visit that page directly. Editing brings you back to the main fields that you have associated to your content type, your page. If you put anything in the layout builder, it won't really show up in this, just as an FYI. So there's two places you typically want to check out, depending on how your workflow is. You also have the ability to delete. You might see a managed display. You don't have to worry about this if that actually pops up for you. This is more of the developer side of things. You have layout, which opens up layout builder, and from here you can add a little bit more content and you can add a little more sections. So if you want something one column and then you want the next row to be 2 columns, you're able to manipulate it a bit here. We did have a training over layout builder that I would recommend looking at for a little bit more in-depth use. The benefit of using layout builder is you do have more flexibility about how your content is organized versus just a standard WYSIWYG editor. The downfall is if you just hit the edit page, you won't see it, and we don't have it. We have it in queue to add something to right now, but SEO doesn't actually pick up the layout builder yet. So we'll be working on that, but that is another thing to consider. Some stuff is a little bit better generated using layout builder than your standard editor. But you're able to do quite a bit with it. Your other tab that you get is revisions. So if you have revisions turned on, and by default they usually are, so there's some sites that have modules that make this a little bit more in-depth. You're able to backtrack and see what changes were made each time that you save a page. And that's what the revision's for. So in case, we publish something tomorrow saying the I-10 is closed and it ends up not being closed, we can revert it to a previous one where it says it wasn't closed and not have to worry about it too much. For RIAs, it does add extra code when you copy and paste from other applications. It kind of depends on the application. Word is notorious for adding their own that just comes with the copy. There is an add-on. I'll have to see if we have it, because I don't remember if we have it or not. There is a module that we could probably look at that gives an extra button, and you can usually paste it into that little modal that pops up, and it'll clean it up when you post it in. Clear formatting also helps too. So when we go to our editing and we need to add stuff, you are able to do quite a bit in the editor. It looks like full HTML is what's needed for adding media, so we'll go ahead and do that. You'll have a whole bunch of toolbars and a bunch of options on your toolbar. You have bold, italic, your typical things you would see in like a Word document or Google. You have the ability to add links. You can do quotes. The media library is a little hidden. It's in the center of all that. That's how you would add media into the WYSIWYG editor itself. When you click on that, it'll give you a pop-up and give you kind of what you already have uploaded. It'll also give you an option to add files. Depending on the content type, some of this might actually be restricted, but in most general cases, you should see other ones like audio files, document, video files, and so forth. If you're uploading a video file, I do recommend you putting that onto YouTube and just directly link it through remote video instead, because it ends up adding to your website size, and that does affect your billing plan, just as an FYI. So if you have way too many files on there and they're just really, really big, it does affect that. It also affects if you have a developer that's trying to work on your site and needs to pull it down, they get all those files, and sometimes that takes a really long time when you have gigabytes and gigabytes of videos. So you're able to select an item and you can insert it. You do get a button that says edit media, so you can change the alternative text. You can tell it to align, you can give it a caption. If you right click on the WYSIWYG editor, sometimes you get different options as well. You do, in some cases, you will get an underline button. I recommend that we avoid underlines in most cases, unless it's very, very critical. Just kind of stick to the bold and italic, because our links are underlined, and a lot of times people just associate anything that's underlined on the web as a link. And if you have it underlined and they try to click it and it doesn't work, they might get frustrated. We also have kind of a format menu that's up here. These are just defaults with the heading 1, heading 2s. Those are what you will generally use. You'll use them pretty often. You do want to make sure that headings are involved when you're writing content. If you're a little more visual and want to know where things are placing, there's a little button next to it. It's a show blocks button, and what that does is it highlights if there's like other HTML divs, sections, and highlights where content's placed in there. You're able to turn that on and off. If you're a little more savvy, you can use source, and you can put basics of HTML in there. Some of the do's and don'ts with this is you don't want to get too chaotic. Don't go try changing the font color through it, because you can do inline styles. You want to be very careful about that. You do want to be careful about adding, if you wanted to add iframes or JavaScript, specifically iframes, you would add it through the source method. You do want to be careful about adding iframes, because wherever that is generated, it may or may not be keyboard accessible, and it may or may not be screen reader accessible. So you want to verify that if you do add an iframe, that you're able to go through it in a different method, or make sure it's even visible for what it needs to do. Sometimes, like if you're adding a Google Calendar, it might be a specific width, and you might have to manipulate that a little bit more. Otherwise, it goes off screen when it goes into a smaller screen like a mobile. For Maria's question, we're looking into that one right now, because that one's in our queue. There isn't, everything has to have an alt image text. There are ways of working around that, but we're trying to figure out what the best proper way of doing it is. I've seen patches, I've seen that would solve it. I have seen workarounds, like we would add a field as a workaround. Part of the reason why it's such a hot topic right now is because we don't want to just default it with it being empty. When we have new content editors, they tend to not know about the alt image text, and they'll leave it blank instead, and that doesn't really do us any good. So that's why the field is set as a requirement right now. We're trying to figure out just kind of the best way. Maybe the best way is just an extra toggle that's optional that says, ignore alt text. This is descriptive or decorative image. That might be the best way to solve our end. For JavaScript, I know that was your other question, Ramel. That one we want to be even super careful with. JavaScript itself, we would have to add through the backend. Generally, there are ways you can add it through the WYSIWYG editor if it was in the sense of just your typical, bottom of the page, you add the script instead of the heading or yeah, the head element. Goes the same way. You do need to be careful about where that comes from. It may not be accessible, it may not work. You have also the consideration that if your jQuery library is conflicting and that tries to load a jQuery library, that's very, very much different. It may actually break things on the site. We've had cases where someone had tried to force a different library, a newer library, and because it was order of operations, the last thing that loaded on the page, it overrode the menu navigation on being able to have the drop downs. So the drop downs actually didn't work on the menu. So you do have to be careful with some of that. The way that CSS and JavaScript particularly load is it's going to go in order of how the code is printed out on the screen. So if you have something that you want to override with that is sitting at the very top of the list, but you have something 4 lines later that injects with the same classes or the same call, it'll actually override what you're trying to do. So we typically don't really want to add JavaScript into the mix unless we do it through the backend programmatically. But you could, in theory, you can add it to as a source. That's one of the don't hack it things if you can help it. If there isn't a need for it though, usually you should be okay, but you should look at discussing about options. We also have a button that I learned a couple weeks ago. We have a template button. This gives a little bit more of some items you can add to your WYSIWYG editor. We are looking into these, so some of it is not quite accessible, but we are working on fixing them. Some of them are accessible and it's okay. But it gives you a little bit different styles. So there are, call to action button. You can make accordions. You can make a box with a button on the right-hand side. There's also block quotes as well, and you can edit those. So you just go to the templates, you add one in, and then you can edit the content that's inside of it. You also have styles with the different headings. If you, based off of the defaults, if you want to use what's also given by the distribution, that's what it's there for. If you have a developer, you can get this a little bit more customized because it is a backend thing that we would have to change. That gives you a little more styling control, so you don't have to do inline styles. We also have, looks like on the full HTML, we do have some paste options. This is kind of where I was mentioning about pasting from Word. Looks like we do have it. There's a little icon, you can click it. Depending on your browser, you paste it in the little modal that pops up. I think I have stuff disabled on this, so the pop-up doesn't work. You can paste it in there and it'll actually clean up all that extra tags that it gives. Let's see, we also have, obviously the undo redos. I think that's the equation. No, it's special character. So if you have special characters you need to find, you can look for them here. And then you're also able to make your WYSIWYG bigger or smaller as well. And that's in the full HTML, by the way. The basic one kind of drops it down. There is a restricted HTML, and if you go back and forth between different versions, you do get this pop-up. It's just telling you that you're, depending on what you go to, so like if you go from full HTML to restrictive, you may actually lose some stuff, which is possible because restrictive, what that does is it only gives you certain things that are allowed, depending on how that actually how that actually looks. And I can show off this tab kind of what it means by that. Um, restrictive says we can use certain tags or certain attributes, certain elements. Those are allowed, but anything beyond it aren't allowed. So we might have image, block quote, code allowed, but maybe we don't have SVG allowed. And so anytime SVG tries to get used, it actually strips it out. Full HTML, meanwhile, is going to mean that, yeah, maybe restrictive said image, block, code, but we can also use SVG in this one. Plain text typically means, if you ever see that pop up, it's just there's no HTML tags whatsoever. The text you put in it is going to look the way however your developer had put it out or however we put it out for that particular field. And there's not going to be any styling differences. Let's see, what else do we have? I think that just about covers it outside of kind of messing around with Layout Builder, but there is a Layout Builder training that I would recommend looking at that one for. The other thing with do's and don'ts, when you guys look at trying to deal with accessibility, you just want to be a little bit mindful about how we're putting the content together. You know, when you add content, you don't want to try to, I don't think we have colors. You don't want to try to make something orange on a pink background. You don't want to put every single thing that you want in big text as a heading one. There are CSS classes we can call if you ever want to look at the Bootstrap stuff. There are display classes that you could use in line to make text a little bit bigger than what it is. And when you go to source, you're able to add those. I don't think it's going to work in this one, but just as an example, you do like display 0 or whatever the relevant class is in Bootstrap. You don't want to go too completely insane and just say style equals color red. If you're more tech savvy, obviously you're more than likely, like me, you're going to want to do it because it's like, I can just do it here. Why not just let me do it? Just be a little cognizant about how you're putting this stuff together. And it does make it difficult to try to identify sometimes where these styles come from if we don't just keep it simple and to the defaults. There might be cases, though, where you do need to override something, and we may not have the answer in agency platforms distribution quite yet, and we may actually tell you, let's do it this way so that way we can get, because you might be the one agency that wants to do it this way. And it's a valid way of doing it. And this, at that point, we would go through and we do something more in line like this through the WYSIWYG editor. What else do we have? You guys have questions? Any more questions regarding some of this? And I guess might be thinking I'm gonna double check my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything yet. I think I covered it all. Looks like I covered it all. So if there's not any questions, we'll go ahead and give you some time back. Alex has a question. Go for it.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not
Okay.
very tech savvy here, so I do have a question. When writing in the body or typing in the body, is there a way to change the spacing? Like, when you hit enter and then it seems like it's giving two spaces down. See, looks like, can you
Yeah.
closer? Is there a way to do that or?
So with this in mind, this gets a little bit tech savvy. So if I do say a word that you're not familiar with, by all means, tell me you don't know what that means, and I'll happily let you know. Um, with our styling that we do, paragraphs are given. If you look at the bottom of this, you'll see like it goes body and then a P. The P stands for paragraph. Uh, we set up on the back end a style that gives a little bit more white spacing in between the paragraphs themselves. Um, you don't really have the ability to change that, but you do at the same time. And this kind of goes with the do's and don'ts, kind of be careful. Um, there are resources that could let you know how to use inline CSS to modify this a little bit more, but that would be something that you would look at the source panel for. And similar to how I would do style, you could actually override that that spacing that you're seeing right there. Um, it's a little harder to see just on the actual editor itself, but the source would provide you that. In this particular case, let me find a paragraph that I can copy and paste in here just as an example. Because when I try to do a show, it doesn't actually show the code, so I can't show it to you that way. So let me find it real quick. So in the CSS, we have something like this, or we tell the paragraph, particularly any paragraph that we use, which is what this little identifier is right here. I don't know if that's easy to see or hard to see for you guys. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more. So we have an identifier, which is the paragraph, and then we're telling these paragraphs, this is how much spacing I want you to put before that particular element. This is how much spacing I want you to put after that particular element. So if you were to override the paragraphs, let's say, because there are valid reasons you do want to add more white space, and that is perfectly fine. What you would do is you would use the source and you go into style. And if, let's say you had something more, you would obviously make sure there is this little semicolon here, but you would add, margin bottom. And maybe you know what spacing you want. Maybe it's 5 rem instead. And what that will do is it will override that call that we made to that specific style. When you go back, now what you'll notice is where it's given that larger, so you don't have to keep hitting enter, 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 and have just empty spaces with paragraph tags aligned with it, which I think Optimize flags that sometimes for some of them. And that would be the go around to doing that.
Thank you.
With that in mind, because we're still building our agency platform to give you guys useful resources, would it be beneficial to find something for you guys that kind of gives you an idea of how to do inline styling a little bit more? Because we can definitely look at that, find some stuff that obviously isn't too crazy. We're adding, orange text to everything, but at least kind of give you some basics. There's some neutral neutral inline stylings that you guys can use that wouldn't affect kind of the display of content that critically that we would have to say, no, you can't do that. Do we have other questions? If we're good, just as a reminder, we do have the agency platform.az.gov that is, it used to be Showcase, if you guys are familiar with that. We're kind of helping it get a little bit better, give you guys a little bit more things that's more useful to you guys and making it useful for you guys to want to keep going back to it and check it out. If there's something you want to have kind of discussed in training or even just as a one-on-one, there is a resources page. And under that, there's a training form. You can just give us feedback there and we're more than happy to give a training based off of it. We want to make sure you guys got everything you guys can ever want to be able to publish data out into the public. So but otherwise, you guys are welcome to have some free time back to your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For joining.